Angelo Codevilla is Professor Emeritus of International Relations at Boston University, Senior Editor of the American Spectator, and a Senior Fellow at the Claremont Institute. Educated at Rutgers, Notre Dame, and the Claremont Graduate School, Codevilla served in the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Foreign Service, and on the U.S. Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. Currently, he is the Vice Chairman of the U.S. Army War College Board of Visitors. His most recent books include The Ruling Class, How They Corrupted America and What We Can Do About It, and Advice to War Presidents, a remedial course in statecraft. Please join me in welcoming Professor Codevilla as he discusses the topic, Does America Have a Ruling Class?
Does America have a ruling class? Well, all you have to do is look at the reaction to the recent elections, and you'll see just how uniform they are. There's very little difference between President Obama's reaction and that of, say, David Frum and say, Peggy Noonan, David Gerson. Essentially, their point is that the American people never quite understood the great efforts that the ruling class had made for them. President Obama said after the election much what he said before the election, namely that the American people were frustrated, they expressed their anger, they were unwilling to listen to reason. Perhaps he could have taken that into greater account. Perhaps they had moved too fast without explaining as much as they should have explained. But really the problem was not so much what he had done, what the government had done. The problem was not the government. The problem was the American people. That's the problem. And today, David Gerson pointed out that the American people, those who had really roused the rabble themselves, had gotten some of what they deserved in the defeat of their most extreme candidates. Same day, Peggy Noonan said, well, people like Sarah Palin really ought to realize that they have to earn their way into government. They can't simply go out and ask for votes. How dare they? How dare they presume to want the things that they want? David Frum positively rejoiced in the defeat of Tea Party people. Again, they had no right to demand the kinds of things that they were demanding. Never mind the fact, of course, that some 65 seats, we're not quite sure yet how many, but some 65 seats changed hands. No, Republicans are talking about how to use those positions of power gained, especially in the state houses, to gain more power. But more power for what? They're talking about, gleefully, about using the newly gained control of state legislature and governorships for further gerrymandering of certain states, Republican states, so that they can have more congressmen. But what kind of congressmen? Congressmen who would do what and why? They don't talk about that. And gerrymandering? Gosh, I have heard literally, and neither have you heard, any criticism of what has become a universally accepted practice, gerrymandering. But now this is, of course, this was something that was considered both immoral and illegal prior to 1962, when the Supreme Court had handed down its Baker versus Carr decision, which established one man, one vote as the sole criterion for the legitimacy of congressional districts. Prior to that time, of course, congressional districts had been drawn according to political subdivisions, counties, that sort of thing. And there were disparities in numbers of people represented by individual congressmen. But these boundaries, these counties, these cities, were more or less natural boundaries, which could not simply be manipulated for political advantage by those in power. All of that went away, and no one is suggesting that this greater honesty, this greater detachment from the manipulation of the powerful be brought back. It is taken for granted that the powerful will manipulate the political system for their own ends. But what are those ends? And what does this have to do with popular government, which is, after all, what the American Revolution was about, which is, after all, what distinguishes the United States of America, or used to distinguish the United States of America from the rest of the world. Why is it? Why is it that neither Republicans nor Democrats seem to have learned anything from these elections, other than that the balance of power has now shifted, the balance of power between the parties has now shifted. No one seems to want to even look at the fact that perhaps the American people themselves have become more active in their own affairs. Now, I suggest to you that this mistake being made by the Democrats, and I think above all by the Republicans, is a fundamental mistake. They are neglecting what I think, I may be wrong, is an epochal change that took place in America about 2 years ago, at the time of the great financial crash. To recapitulate, at that time, Republicans and Democrats in high positions, pundits ranging from the Wall Street Journal to the Nation magazine, from the left to the right, said unanimously, in almost the same, no, not almost, in the same words, that unless certain things were done, the nation would run the unacceptable systemic risk of systemic collapse of the entire economic system. Everybody would lose his house and his savings. Nobody explained how that would happen. And when you ask the eminent economists who said such things, how would these things happen? They had no answer. They simply repeated the mantra, systemic risk, systemic collapse. One wonders, I don't really, I'm convinced, that they in fact did not themselves know what they meant. But they did mean to gather to themselves the power to spend some $1 trillion at first for one purpose, which they then quickly dropped and spent it for another purpose, making certain promises which of course have not been fulfilled, but the non-fulfillment of which does not seem to have dented their faith in their own omniscience. Now, the American people noticed, and did so immediately. The polls were stunning, 3-1, 4-1, against this united position of the ruling class. And of course, this is where the term ruling class came from, the realization that you had this unity at the top between Republicans and Democrats, a unity which really did not care anything about the opinions of the American people, denigrated those opinions as ignorant and stupid. Now, being a college professor, I've had a great deal of experience with ignorance and stupidity. And I fully believe that ignorance and stupidity are demonstrable. And I actually take a certain amount of pleasure in demonstrating them when I come across them. And I would have thought that people who are so keen on the stupidity of the American people would perhaps try to demonstrate it. But I've seen no attempt to demonstrate that stupidity. I've seen no attempt to demonstrate their own intelligence. I've seen simply an axiomatic repetition of the mantra, we know best, you shut up and obey. Now, how do you get to that? How does such a class arise with such a prejudice so impervious to reality, a prejudice which no one even thinks to try to defend? How do you get there? Well, I suggest to you that the intellectual history behind this prejudice is interesting and complex, and that intellectual history is bolstered by and intertwined with the political history of the growth of government. These two attitudes, this attitude grew out of, on the one hand, certain intellectual trends, on the other hand, the growth of government, and these two trends became personified in certain people. The intellectual side is quite straightforward. It begins with the rejection of the notion of human equality upon which this country was founded, rejection in the early 19th century. That rejection was based on a certain belief in, a certain conception rather, of science, primarily biology. Biology was thought to demonstrate that changes in breeding, or more pointedly race, in plants and animals as well as in human beings, could evolve or devolve into more or less perfect specimen of the same species, and indeed into different species. Charles Darwin was by no means the inventor of this idea. This is an idea that he popularized, but which by the 1830s, 1840s, 1850s had become the common property of advanced intellectuals everywhere. Along with that went the idea of moral perfectibility, and certainly whereas many Southerners believed that they were physically and intellectually superior to blacks, many Northerners believed that they had evolved morally to a position of superiority over Southerners. But superiority, of course, always endows the superior with a right to rule the inferior. After the Civil War, this notion coalesced into commonly accepted social Darwinism, which placed the Anglo-Saxon race above all others in a superior grasp of Christianity, a superior grasp of technology, a superior grasp of civility, and supposedly gave the Anglo-Saxon race the right to rule the world. It was a very, very short step from social Darwinism to progressivism, and its assumption of the right to purify the country, the world, to make rules by which all would abide and which would improve all. Of course, the most memorable of these rules was prohibition, which was supposed to sober the country and improve its mores, get rid of crime, and do all sorts of good things like that. Being an Italian, the notion of living without wine, but that's just a racial prejudice on my part. But at any rate, it didn't quite work out that way. And progressives have been, nor did, for that matter, World War I work out that way. The American people never quite forgave the progressives for that. And the progressives got increasingly bitter toward the American people for their increasing lack of respect for their presumption of superiority. Now, I remember when I was in college being forced to read books like Theodore Adorno's The Authoritarian Personality and Herbert McCloskey's Conservatism and Personality, which proved scientifically that non-liberal Americans were fascists and that we were afflicted with every imaginable kind of social disease, anomie, well, the same kinds of social diseases that Barack Obama cites and for that matter, Peggy Noonan, et cetera, cite as hallmarks of the Tea Party, i.e. the American people. Now, I won't go into just how unscientific these studies are. They are ridiculously unscientific. As an undergraduate, being exposed to them, I did a class project which, using the same methodology, proved conclusively that liberals suffered from all of those diseases, plus body odor, et cetera, et cetera. It's very easy. It's very, very easy to do such things, ridiculously so. And if you pay any attention to the intellectual mechanisms, you can have some fun. But fun is not part of what these folks are about. My point is that long ago, people like Barack Obama stopped thinking about why they are superior. They simply are. Now, this superiority is primarily, they say, an intellectual superiority. But, as it turns out, these very people are very, very touchy about their own academic records. These are the very people who dislike standardized testing, who treat their own SAT scores as national secrets. In the case of Barack Obama, you may or may not know, there is not one single thesis of his that is available in the Columbia Library or anywhere else. There is not a single signed article of his in the law review of which he was, in fact, the editor. I mean, I don't know of any editor of any law review. If you know of one, tell me, because I don't know of any, who has not had an article in his own law review. He has not. There is nothing there to criticize. There is nothing there to grab onto. And this is a peculiarly American phenomenon, this presumption. There are places that are ruled by intellectual snobs. France, for example, for which I have a deep and abiding love. I'm probably the last Republican Francophile alive. I confess I love France. And one of the reasons why I love it is that its snobism is so overt. If you are at the top of the French hierarchy, you have credentials that anyone can see. You pass tests that others have failed. Yeah. You came in 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 points ahead on an objective test that others came in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 points behind. Not so in America. All we've got here is the pretense of intellectual, a pretense which cannot be defended. The debate is over, they say. How dare you question? Who are you to question what we have to say, what our government-funded scientists say about global warming, etc.? Who are you to question what we say about a whole bunch of things? Well, as I say, this is a peculiarly American phenomenon, and it is a phenomenon of which the American people have become quite intolerant. Now, these elections, to get back to politics, these elections manifested quite a bit of that. What do they mean? Where is this taking America? Answer, we do not know. This is the beginning of the struggle. Many believe, including the Republican Party, that this is the end of the struggle. I beg to differ. Now, just how far it's going to go, we do not know. We will find out. Indeed, we will be instrumental in finding out. Let me give you some examples and some gauges by which to measure what is going to happen in the future. So the Republicans have control of the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives, the fountainhead of financial legislation. Money bills originated in the House. You all learned that. There's a phrase, the meaning of which I learned when I worked in Congress. A powerful phrase. It goes like this. No funds appropriated herein shall be spent for. That's very, very, very tough language in America, in American law. These were the words, just for example, the Boland Amendment, which prohibited aid to the Contras in Nicaragua in 1984, and the flouting of which nearly brought down the Reagan presidency in 1986. I recall arguing strenuously with Bud McFarlane back in 1984 against agreeing to a bill that contained that language. I was not heeded, but that's beside the point. It's an extraordinarily powerful piece of language. That language can be attached to countless provisions of law. With that language, a simple language which it is fully in the power of the House of Representatives to enact, You can defund all sorts of activities, people, programs. You don't have to repeal Obamacare. You simply attach that language to any number of things relating to it, and it effectively ceases to exist. You can even attach it to bills having to do with the Federal Reserve and thereby prevent it from selling. You can't prevent it from printing those IOUs, which it calls dollars, but you can prevent them from selling it, those IOUs, i.e. putting them into the market and turning them into dollars, you say. You can do 1,001 things with those few words, which the Republicans have every capacity to enact, thereafter forcing the president to veto not the entire government budget, but countless pieces of the budget. In other words, this is a power which, if exercised intelligently, is very, very, very great. We will know very quickly whether the Republicans intend to use that power at all. And if they do not, well, then we will know just what little effect these elections have had. There are a whole bunch of other things that this majority could do. It could, again, not just eliminate funding for the NPR or any number of educational, the education department, or any number of educational things. But will it do any of them? In what is this majority interested? I heard one bold claim that this majority is going to roll back federal spending to 2008 levels. Goodness gracious, that will accomplish an awful lot, won't it? Will this majority do anything, even acknowledge that there is a basic problem with the administrative state? Let me say a few words about that, because this is something that the Tea Parties and a whole bunch of American citizens have awakened to. Very, very fundamental problem. All of us, when we were in school, learned that we were subject to laws enacted by Congress and by our state legislatures, even city councils, and that these laws are applied by courts, and that for us to be fined or convicted of offenses, we must be tried before a jury of our peers. Well, we know perfectly well that we are not ruled by laws made by our representatives, that in the vast majority of cases we are ruled by rules made by administrative agencies and enforced by administrative agencies. We never get to see a jury of our peers, et cetera, et cetera. What is to be done about that? Well, it is entirely possible to force administrative agencies to subject administrative agencies to the Anglo-Saxon legal system, i.e. to legislate a presumption of innocence for anyone brought up on charges before any administrative agency, and to stipulate by law that no one shall be fined or otherwise inconvenienced by any such agency unless he is convicted by a jury of his peers. The administrative state can be brought to heel in part by such provisions. It can also be brought to heel in part by the process of election. We have heard that, by the way, there seems to be a consensus that President Obama is going to, now that he cannot legislate all sorts of things, is going to do those very same things through the executive branch, through the administrative agencies. And of course, we have absolutely no purchase upon the EPA or any of the other agencies. And if the EPA chooses to makes regulations about coal-burning plants, regulations that will increase the prices you pay for electricity, et cetera, why, what can we do about it? Well, almost nothing. Unless, of course, we legislate that the members of these agencies' boards henceforth be elected. We could, by legislation, force anyone who would be a member of these agencies' boards to come before the voters to explain his program, why it is preferable to the program of someone else who wanted to lead the agency, so that the voters might choose among them. So there are a whole bunch of things that could be done to fulfill the tremendous dissatisfaction that the American people feel toward their government. The ratio between those Americans who think that the federal government might do good and those who think that it is capable of only doing harm is these days is somewhere around 1 to 5. There is the amount of dissatisfaction is very great. The depth of the dissatisfaction is very deep. And it really does come down to the fact that we have very, very little and increasingly less control over this government. We could increase that by some of the things that I have mentioned. It appears to me that the Republican Party has very little interest in doing that. Perhaps the American people over the next couple of years can give the Republican Party that kind of interest. Again, the Republican Party seems to think right now that the battle is over, that that we are, quote, back to normal, because they have a share of power. It is entirely possible for the American people to remind the Republican Party that this is not so. Now, I will now take your questions and elaborate on any of these matters. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for coming. Would you care to comment on, within 24 hours of the election results Tuesday night, Matt Bernanke decided to throw $700 or $800 billion in quantitative easing at our financial problems?
Well, what did you expect? Look, let me say one thing in favor of Mr. Bernanke. The U.S. economy is in bad shape. The political branches, the President and Congress, have given no hint that they are going to do anything to improve that. The Federal Reserve finds itself out there all alone, and it feels compelled to do something. Nobody else is doing anything which might do some good. No, whether inflating our way out of our problems is a good idea or not, it is a way. And it really is about the only way that the Federal Reserve has available to it at this point. Look at the opposite course of action on the part of the Federal Reserve. What if it had, in fact, raised interest rates immediately? The immediate effect, of course, would have been a crash in the stock market, a further decline in confidence. Perhaps it should have done nothing. But I mean, I can't blame them too much, or as much as I blame the political branches for keeping taxes and spending too high, because it is that level of taxation and expenditure that is choking the economy. As for inflation, you tell me, or anybody tell me, how these debts which have been run up are going to be paid except by cheapening the currency. I mean, I just don't know of anything else that's going to do it. I mean, it's a terrible thing to say, but I think it's the truth. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for coming. You mentioned that thank you very much for coming. You mentioned that the ruling class is neglecting what the people are saying. My fast question there, and then I have a secondary question, is do they know that they're neglecting what the people are saying? That's my first question. The second question is, you didn't mention anything, or do you have an opinion on whether judges are part of the ruling class as well? So those are my
Yeah, two questions. Do they know? Well, the first question is really very interesting. No. I think the answer to that is no. They don't know because take somebody like, well, not just Obama, but even a Michael Gerson, somebody like that. These are people who have never stepped outside of the room. They confuse themselves with the people. I remember when I was on the Hill here, any number of my colleagues would leave the employee of the Senate and would go out into the private, what they call the private sector. Private sector, my foot. They would become lobbyists. They would go into that part of American life that depends on and services the government. Look, take for example a Michelle Obama. Just to give you one example, I hate to use him because he is by no means unique. He is not nearly as important as the environment from which he comes. He's not that important. And if Michelle Obama were the problem, we wouldn't have any problems. But she's not the problem. She's merely one of countless folks in her position. She got a $300,000 a year job as essentially a minority coordinator, whatever the hell that means.
They didn't replace that.
Of course not, but that's beside the point. And the hospital and the private hospital the private company from which she worked, made money from paying her that salary. Now, is that private activity? Well, yes, in a certain sense, but no, in the sense in which it is ordinarily understood. These people are not producing things that other people would want to pay for unless they were compelled to pay for them. What about all of those folks who are making money, producing and selling all of those stupid spiral bulbs that many of us are screwing into our sockets? Are they engaged in private enterprise? Well, yes, in a certain sense. And they may certainly believe that they are, but no, they're not. Because there would be no market for those idiotic things if Congress had not forced that market. What about all of that very good corn that gets turned into very bad booze by these enormous stills that are rising all over the Midwest? Is that private enterprise? Well, yes and no, but mostly no. You see, one of the problems with, and the ultimate answer to your question, is that we have, the government has infiltrated the private sector in a way that has perverted it. It is a lot. If your son were to ask you, Dad, what should I do in my studies to get rich? Learn what it is that, or you become a clerk for a judge, and learn what the prejudices of those judges are, then sell that knowledge in the private sector. The private sector will pay dearly for the knowledge of the prejudices of that judge. Yes, sir.
This will be our final question.
The one aspect of this ruling class you spoke very little about was the courts. And so I'd like you to talk a little bit about that. And is there any practical way that we can, or that this new Congress can yield in this out of control institution that overcomes not just laws, duly enacted laws, but also statewide referenda? They basically review every single piece of legislation. They are like they have to sign off on legislation or it's not law. So how do we get around this?
Well, then it's more than that. I mean, they actually prescribe, courts actually prescribe the content of laws, etc. I just got finished giving a class in constitutional law on Article 3 of the Constitution. Along with that, this is a class to a Tea Party. Huh? We read Federalist number 78, in which Hamilton makes the definitive argument for lifetime tenure of the judiciary, appointment of the judiciary, etc., essentially for the system that we have now. And Federalist 78 is a very, very good argument. Hamilton, however, in 78, says, you know, all of the benefits that I am describing are contingent upon the judiciary branch maintaining its independence, because if the executive branch, if the judiciary branch were to somehow become an ally, a subject, really, of the executive, all of that would be lost. Well, your point is that this is what has actually happened. And therefore, the conclusion is that the rest of Hamilton's beautiful, powerful, appealing argument in Federalist number 78 no longer applies. Therefore, since, as Hamilton feared, the executive, the legislative branch has become yet another legislative branch, a kind of super legislature controlled by the executive. What to do? The only reasonable thing, and it is not a good solution, but it is, and it's not a solution to which I personally have come with any alacrity at all, is to subject them to election. I mean, does this denature them as spokesmen for law? Yes, it does. But they have denatured themselves already. Look, you now have 5 more or less conservative judges, all of them appointed by Republicans, and 4 obviously leftist judges, all of them appointed by Democrats. There is zero prospect that this Democratic president, or any Democratic president, will appoint any but leftist Democrats. There isn't much greater chance that Republican presidents will appoint any but more or less conservative judges. Handicappers have been handicapping the court for a long time with a great deal of accuracy. Why not let the American people in on the game? What harm would be done other than to do away with what has become a pleasant fiction, that we are living under law? You read many of the Supreme Court decisions, and they don't read like laws. You know, they don't read like legal arguments. They read like legal pretexts. Hadley Arcus, who will speak at the next of these meetings, pointed out that Justice Breyer's argument against the majority decision that applied the Second Amendment to the states, that argument was obviously insincere, because if Breyer really meant that argument, he would be applying it to all sorts of other things, which Breyer wouldn't do if his life depended on it. I mean, there is nothing sincere about Breyer's position, or for that matter, the position of many other justices on many other. What they are doing is manipulating legal terminology to support policy conclusions. Now, this is not universal yet, but it's close to that. And I can't think of anything that can be done about it, because this is a change that has taken place in the culture of our ruling class. And cultural changes come very slowly. They are big. They're huge. If I've said anything at all today, which you should take home with you, is that events such as the election that we've just been through are tiny. They are tiny events in comparison with the huge intellectual and physical changes that have taken place in America. It's going to take a hell of a lot more than a change of 60 seats from D to R to, for example, change the culture of the judiciary so that it cares about law. It's going to take a hell of a lot more so that administrative agencies fall under the Anglo-Saxon system of law rather than the Napoleonic system. By the way, parenthesis, and this is something you can take away with you. If you look at how administrative law in America is run, what it is, what administrative law in America is, you will see nothing Anglo-Saxon about it. It is purely Napoleonic. It is purely continental European. Now, you don't change something like that just by changing 60 seats from D to R.
Thank you very much.